I'm Brian Wallace, Executive Director at CPW, and this is our Thursday night weekly event, Meet the Artist, and I'm thrilled this week to have as our speaker Michael Torres. Most of you probably know Michael Torres. He is a Kingston legend, and his current photography project, Living Legends, is a must-see exhibition. You got to run over there to the Cornell Creative Arts Center because it's closing Saturday. So there's a closing reception from 1 to 4, so mark that on your calendar. But it's a fantastic exhibition, not only about the living legends of Kingston, those, let's say, elders of the community that Michael has been photographing, but it's also a really good example of Michael's process. He's, I think, a really fascinating photographer. We at CPW knew Michael because he was our upstairs neighbor when we were on Broadway for a couple of years. But also, there's a great, maybe permanent exhibition of his photographs at Stone Soup. So you can see his jazz photography there. Fantastic. But just in terms of his formal biography, Michael is a self-taught photographer based in Kingston and from Kingston. He returned home after living in Baltimore for 30 years. And while he was in Baltimore, he studied with James Phillips and Valerie Maynard. He was raised by an African-American mother and a Puerto Rican father, and the influences of both of these cultural streams has enriched his own artistic perspective. His mother, Mary, gave him her Kodak Brownie camera when he was just 10 years old, and he has carried on the practice that she established of photographing family life and events with that camera and maybe subsequent versions. Michael turned towards a more serious study of photography in 2007. So he's relatively new, self-taught, relatively new, after firmly establishing his medical career and recognizing the need for balance and creative expression. Exhibiting sharp observational skills, attention to detail, intercultural competence, and a profound sense of spirituality. His work encompasses an eclectic array of photography genres. His specialty is performance photography with a focus on jazz photography. And as I said, you can see that at Stone Soup. But he's also exhibited frequently at other venues throughout Kingston, Transart, and other places, and hurry down to Cornell Creative Center and see that show before it closes. But now, our friend, Michael Torres.
Hello, everyone. So nice to see everyone here. Is that good, Sarah? Okay. So I'm going to, what? Oh. Lights on the screen. Oh, that's much better. Thank you all for having me here this evening. I'm going to share snippets of two different series. So the first series is related to the exhibit that is currently at the Cornell Creative Arts Center. And it is about considerations of race, and age. And it is a direct extension of a program that I was involved in last year this time, which was to restore maybe 400 photos that were taken by Ben Wigfall and Sharon Fitzgerald. And they did a comprehensive view of what life was like in the Black community in the 60s and 70s. So as you can imagine, all of the people, or many of the people that were captured at that time, are now the seniors here in Kingston. And I grew up knowing many of those people as I was growing up, and they were very much a part of my life, and contemporaries of people like my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother and her family. So I grew up in multi-generational households, and spent a lot of time with the seniors in my family. That was also facilitated by my having severe asthma when I was growing up. So I had a strong cohort of siblings and cousins, but when I was sick with asthma, they were not staying home with me to entertain me. They were out doing what they were supposed to do, and I was left with the seniors. But my life was enriched by that, by hearing all of the stories and perspectives that they had to share. So as I came back to Kingston 4 years ago, many of the seniors were passing away in rapid succession. And I felt it was very important to capture those who were still living. And I really set out to capture all of the African American seniors who were still living here in Kingston. I managed to capture just over 100, and there's maybe 101, 102 in the exhibit at the Cornell Creative Arts Center. So I'm not going to show you all of them, because I want you to come Saturday and look at the entirety of the body of work that's there. So as you can imagine, or maybe you can imagine, most of the people that lived in Kingston were transplants from the South. In my own family, my great-grandfather, Willie Childs, was sent north by my great-grandmother, whose name was Louise, in search of better job opportunities. She was very disappointed to find that he ended up in Kingston and not New York City, as Kingston was a similar size to their town of South Boston, Virginia. But my great-grandfather worked on the brickyards, and when he was not able to do that any longer, he worked for Trailways bus station when it was on Broadway, and his job there was to clean out the buses in between trips. So I think that's the story for many of the older Black families that ended up in Kingston, originally from the South, moving north for job opportunities. And they encountered racism, they encountered discrimination, they encountered micro insults, microaggressions throughout their lives. And church was a refuge for them to find community, to bring community together, and to find strength in the context of the experiences that they were having when away from the family, at work and at school. So I thought it was very important to acknowledge their strength and their resilience and their ability to survive all of those experiences and to honor them with an exhibit. And they were very enthusiastic about participating mostly. I'm probably related to half of the people that I took photos of, and some of my relatives really gave me a hard time, especially the female and vain family members. So I wasn't able to practice these or to capture these portraits in the way that my good friend and colleague Chris Johnson does by having them come to a studio. So I really channeled the way that Ben Wigfall approached the capture of people in the community. And that was by going to their churches, going to birthday parties and funerals. And by doing those, or by attending those, I was able to capture many people in a short period of time. It was very important to me to use shrubs or trees as a background. For most of the portraits, there were some people that weren't mobile, so I shot them in their homes. But for the most part, you see trees in the background, and that was very important to me because just as you think about a forest being a community of trees, these are a community of people with deep roots in the community and with branches that extended to many lives during the course of their lives. So I'm going to show you photos of the maybe 10 to 15 of the oldest of the elderly. So I had the great opportunity to shoot on Monday the person who we think is the very oldest in the Kingston community. And she wasn't known to me initially, but members of her church pointed out that there was someone older than the person I thought was the oldest, and that I had to make sure I got her into the exhibit. So we set her up to do a shoot on Monday, and I will show you her photo. Feel free to stop and ask me questions as I go along. I hope this to be a nice dialogue. And so this is Gladys Thomason. She's 96 years old, and she is a spry 96. She made her living doing factory work. She was a lines worker. And she's an avid, that's the other thing, that most of these elderly are still part of a congregation, and their families are very involved in their lives. So, you know, these are not people who are isolated and not supported. These people have a great deal of support around them. She is a member of New Progressive Baptist Church. This is the lovely lady who I thought was the oldest, and she is 94 years old, Dorothy Kithcart Broadhead. She worked as a nurse's aide and as a teacher's aide for most of her life. This is Rosetta Vandermark. She is 91 years old. Her husband was the first African-American detective in the city of Kingston. Agnes Washington is 90 years old. And again, I skipped their churches. Dorothy was a member of Riverview Baptist Church for many, many years, a contemporary of my grandmother, Ella Lindsay. And that, I forgot to say, When I approached these people, of course, I was very young the last time that I saw or they saw me. So I would say, I am Ella Lindsay's grandson, or I'm Sookie's son. My mother Mary's nickname here in Kingston was Sookie. So as soon as I mentioned those two people, they would say, "Oh, I know who you are." And that helped me to get these photos. Rosetta is a member of New Central Baptist Church, which is in Pankaki. Agnes Washington is also a member of New Central, and she worked as a telephone operator for many years. This is Dolores Broadhead Costello. And I don't know if you have heard of the Costello family here in Kingston, but her son, Billy Costello, was the welterweight champion for a period of time here. She was in hospice care at the time that I took this photo in her house, and she passed away a couple of weeks later. So if you see the exhibit, she is on a wall along with the gentleman who passed away before the exhibit went up also. So she just passed away in October. This lovely couple, George Kithcart and Jenny Kithcart. George was a mason. His wife worked for the telephone company. Janet Shirley Mills, age 90. Alfreda Brown, age 89. She was the mother of someone that I went to high school with here. Arthur Miller and his wife, Janice Miller. So the interesting story about this photo of Janice, they live a block away, or yeah, maybe a block or half a block away from the church they attend, which is New Progressive Baptist Church. So she gave me permission to take her photo, but she said I had to take it while she was walking home. She would, and she was using a walker, and I had to walk in peace with her as she was walking home and get the photo, because she was very clear she was not going to stop and pose for me.
It's pretty sharp.
Yes, yes, yes. John Wallace was a manager at IBM. He's 89 years old. A wonderful artist. I tried to get him to exhibit some of his watercolors at the exhibit at Cornell Creative, but he was a little bit shy of doing that. This is Joan Brown Gaunt. The Browns are a very big African-American family here in Kingston. You might know Carl Brown and others in that family. She worked as an LPN. These are James Childs and his wife, Dorothy. James, we call him Uncle Jimmy. That's my mother's oldest brother. And he's the pastor of Point of Praise Church. He was very much involved in the civil rights movement and worked for IBM as a manager also. His wife was one of the early RNs here in Kingston. And of course, many of you know Juma Sultan. Now, he was away in Florida when I was taking portraits, but he gave me the okay to use a photo that I took of him while he was performing. So, any questions about any of these folks? All right. So there are 85 more photos to view. And the age ranges from 96 to 62. All right, so next I'm going to move on to a series that I took in Cuba, in Havana. And I want to have a discussion about colorism. Can anyone tell me what colorism is? Go ahead, Barry.
Well, issue of colorism within, what could be within a race or between two races. But we're talking about African Americans, for instance. The issue of certain people look at it as a certain class based on how light or dark their skin is. I'm a graduate of Harvard University. Back maybe a generation or two before me, they had something called the brown paper bag test.
Yes.
And if you were any darker than the color of a brown paper bag, you were not happy or couldn't even get in.
Mhm. That's true.
And I think the origins of this go back, to slavery.
Exactly.
You see some of the house Negroes who were maybe favored by the slave masters who were lighter skin and the darker skin.
Who worked in the field.
Yes.
Yes.
But colorism is an issue today, still. And I can talk forever.
Yes, Anaje.
The colorism, the hierarchy of colorism intersects with the level of sexual violence of slave owners.
Yes.
Now, all of that is true, and it's very important to point out, though, that the lighter-skinned ones were of the slave master's own making.
Yes.
Their children were the lighter-skinned ones and more accepted. So I've been reading a book by Isabella Wilkerson called Caste. And it's a fascinating read because she puts this all in context as the United States of America having a caste system, very similar to what you find in India and what you find in many of the Caribbean islands and anywhere where there was colonization and a gradient of people from light skin to dark skin. I experienced this in my own family with my, on the Puerto Rican side. So my grandmother, my father's mother, was very dark skinned, but from Puerto Rico. My grandfather was considered a white Puerto Rican. And I never noticed any issue between them. I didn't notice any issue as I observed them interacting in their church setting or in their community setting. In New York, they lived in a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood, and they were both accepted equally as far as I could tell. And so when I planned a trip to La Habana in 2017, I thought I would encounter the same sense of community, knowing that there would be a variation in skin color in Cuba. As many of you probably know, Fidel Castro, when he sent away the wealthy class in Cuba, thought that he eliminated racism in Cuba. But there are plenty of articles, one by Elizabeth Obregon, that talks about how the issue of colorism survived even though they felt that racism had been eliminated. So I wasn't really prepared to encounter anything in particular on my first trip to Havana. I just really wanted to experience the culture, the music, the colors of the building, the colors of the people. And it was a very rich experience. I ended up going back again to Havana in 2018. But what I found there was a very strong sense of colorism. And I'm going to go through a set of photos for you to see and hopefully comment on. So this gentleman is a tourism ambassador, full of character, and he's been doing this for a long time. So has anyone here been to Havana? Okay, a couple of you have. I don't know if you encountered him, but he is everywhere. And this really captures his essence. So there are different categories of skin color. So he would be considered un moro. So there are the negros, there are los blancos, there are los moros, and the moros are those who are darker skinned but have European features and straight hair. Okay, so this is a very good example, and I'll show you others. This lovely lady was, this is her livelihood in La Habana. And she's in traditional garb. And if you see, can you see the baby? It's a doll, but it's not, yes. Another example of un moro. And you can see that he strongly embraces the African culture with his shirt. And, you know, this is a pose that he selected for himself. Most of this is just street photography, but I had a connection with the people. I spoke enough Spanish to get by, and there wasn't much verbal communication with this young man, but this is his pose here. Now, this couple I encountered walking down a street, and I was listening to a band playing on the opposite side of the street, and I came across them and asked them if I could take their photo. And they were very happy to allow me to. And after I took a few photos, I showed it to him. So he reprimanded me in this first set of photos because his feet were cut off. And he wanted his shoes to be in the photo. So I had to, you know, recompose, take the photo again, and then he was very happy with this. Or they were very happy. And can you see the sign that they're making with their hands? Yes, that's right. So as I did research about this, it just so happens that 94% of Afro-Cubanos are supported by the state system in Cuba. And most of them had labor jobs. And this is one example of an isolated young man doing labor or taking a break from labor. And from an ethical perspective, I should let you know that I had permission to take the photos, and I also gave each subject that I took money. So I was very ethical about that. These gentlemen worked for Aguas de la Habana. So the waterworks department, and every department had a different color scheme that they wore. This young man shoveling asphalt. And when I approached him to give him money, he actually asked me, well, why are you giving me money? And I said, well, I'm giving you money for allowing me to take the photo. This gentleman was making beaded necklaces. Again, a very strong identification with African culture. This young lady, she was not in central Havana. She was off to like a series of side streets. And when I asked her if I could take her photo, she emphatically said no. And then I said, para dinero? And then there was a big smile on her face, and she allowed me to take the photo. But afterward, we had the conversation that many people come to Cuba and take pictures without an exchange. And that's what she was reacting to. People's expectation that they can take a photo but not give back. And so we had a lovely exchange afterward, and I told her that, no, it would not do that. And of course, she also offered flowers to me, but, my hands were full of cameras. Yes, she is. Yes. That's a good catch, Ward. Okay. She was also selling flowers, but like one at a time. But for the photo, she picked up the figure that you see in her hands. And what struck me was that the figure is the same color that she is. And I assumed that it was a figure of Jesus, but it could have been of a saint or something else. But that was very striking to me. The embargo has caused a lot of problems for the people of Cuba, and many of them live destitute lives. Now, the business owners and restaurant owners are not the darker skinned people still. This woman is obviously a street sweeper, but was very happy to allow me to take her photo, again, in exchange for some money. I saw a lot of santerias in Cuba, and so the women in white garb followed santeria, and these were all three of these women were related. So again, someone who was a santeria, you can see another black doll there. I sat observing her for quite a while before, and it was a while before she allowed me to take her photo. She had to do a reading for me before I could take the photo. So that was all very interesting. In some ways, very accurate, though. Another woman in white. I stumbled upon a print studio, and this was one of the artists in the print studio. Again, obviously negro. Another artist who had a small studio, like a street front studio. This band of musicians were walking through different streets. Sort of a carnival setting. Performers at a hotel, an outdoor cafe, actually. And this is the last photo of dancers. This was at a restaurant. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I'm wondering what the perception of most Americans are about colorism in Cuba, because I didn't know there were darker Cubans until Telephone Season, the boxer.
Uh-huh.
You know, up until that, the other Cuban boxers were all light skinned.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very different if you look at the Cubans in Miami versus the Cubans in Havana. Yes.
When you were photographing people, were they where you found them, or did you orient them toward windows or
No, these were as I found them.
so the doors and the windows was critical place
Yes.
for
Mm-hmm.
people to sit?
Yes.
When you were photographing the elders in Kingston, did people want a copy of the photograph for themselves?
Well, what I let them know was that for their participation, they would receive a photo. Yes. So that's the way that was planned. So actually this Saturday for the closing reception, the seniors who were in the show will receive the photos that are on the wall. Yes. And then if their family members want additional photos, then they would order. Yes.
I've been twice. I was last year, 2019, and I did first year I went, but I was taken aback when I pleasantly surprised at the warm reception that I got when I said I was from New York. It loved us.
Yes.
It was very, very happy.
Yeah, they were very friendly, very warm. Yes. Yes.
I was actually there in 1996 and I did a series of photos, and it's nice to see the timelessness. It reminded me that it still feels.
Yes.
You know, it's still frozen in time.
That's right.
My question is actually about the first series, though. How is your lens, your personal lens, impact the work that you did? Because you had such familiarity with, I guess, almost everybody that you
Yes.
saw in that first split.
That's correct. It's interesting. I was humbled by their willingness to allow me, a younger person than they, to take their photo. I was nervous many times because I knew them in certain roles and as having, matriarchal or patriarchal positions in their families. And I was nervous about adequately representing them in a photograph. So that was more of the dynamic, but they were very gracious about it. And even when I would go back to their churches and get fresh photos of them. One experience that I can share with you that didn't make me feel so good was at one of the funerals. I was shooting the wife of the person who had passed away. And she did not object at all to my taking the photo, even though, this was after the funeral. And I felt I did it because there was a time pressure. I knew I was going to do this exhibit for Black History Month, and there was only so much time and not necessarily chance to meet with the people to get the photo. But when I saw the photo, it wasn't the best representation of her. So at another event, probably another funeral that she was attending for someone else, just not someone as close to her husband, I said, why don't we get another photo, because the other one was just after your husband's photo. And that one, of course, was much more like her.
The two-part. I think I know the answer to the first one, but I don't know how many people realize you're an MD. What kind of doctor?
I'm a psychiatrist.
I knew that. But my son is, well, they all of them may not have known that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, especially since you're self-taught, what, if any, is the juxtaposition of your medical training and as you've grown as a photographer, what impact did one have on the other, if at all?
I think that's a good question. And I don't talk about it because I think my photography work should stand on its own. And if it stands at all, it should stand on its own. So I think that medical training is, there's a knowledge base to it, of course, but a lot of it is based on observation. So what do you observe going on with a person? And more importantly, how well do you connect with an individual to be able to observe and to elicit information? So I think my ability to connect with people is a direct manifestation of 30 years of working as a psychiatrist. And I think my ability to connect comes across in both series. So I think that's kind of the answer.
I've been curious about that since I met you.
Well, thank you. Brian?
I'm curious about the project you described, the then Falls photographs of Kingston.
Yes.
Black residents in the 60s and 70s, I guess. And how did that relate to your own memories and childhood growing up in Kingston and the relation with these elders?
Yeah, that's a good question. So going back to my relationship with my grandmother. She attended Riverview Baptist Church, which is in Pankaki, just a block off the Strand and the West Strand. And my grandmother's house was on the Strand, directly behind the church. And I spent summers with my grandmother and Sundays at her house for dinner. And New Central was just a block, New Central Baptist Church was just a block away on the Strand. So I was interacting with all of these people. I saw them, I knew most of them. And so when I looked at Ben's photos and was restoring them, those were very strong memories of the places where he shot the photos, as well as the events that he shot, as well as the people that he captured. So there were a few of us who sat around my table as I was restoring the photos. Deborah was one of them, Deborah Brown Hines. Dina Washington was another one. And we just talked about all of the stories that were associated with those photographs. And it was a big motivating factor for me to do this project, because I was so closely connected with the people. Yes.
I haven't seen experiences from another project, and some of those involve the church, and the sense of community. That's what the church seems to be a very sense of the whole community together.
Yeah, a few different churches.
Yeah,
And the trees that served as the backdrop were unique to the churches where I shot many of the photos also. So there's another link there. The trees are very different sometimes. So the churches where I shot were New Progressive, New Central, Riverview, and Point of Praise. And, you know, those were I would say, the most prominent Black churches growing up also. Yes.
A Torres, clothing. I'm getting ready to do a portrait project. The question I have is, did that come up? The subjects, wherever they wanted to?
Well, like I said, these were by chance meetings. I showed up where they were going to be. So there was very little prep, and they showed up the way they were, and I worked with what they had on and edited accordingly. Yeah. Richard?
First of all, I love the fact that how, you know, doing these photos and the way you did them carries on that spirit idea that they approach that people approach the community. And I was wondering if you grew up in the Bronx also.
Yeah, I did live in the Bronx.
In a very different background.
Yes. No, it was a Spanish Methodist church that they attended, yeah.
But have you done anything about
Of the Bronx neighborhood? No, my grandparents sold the house to the family house in the Bronx to another Puerto Rican family that we knew. I did think about going back to shoot the neighborhood, but the people would not be the same. Even the neighborhood where their church was would be very different at this point. But yeah, I did live, we lived above, my grandparents had a duplex and we lived upstairs from them in the Bronx. And so I spent a lot of time with them downstairs. My grandfather was a professional musician at night, and by day he worked in a clothing factory. So I would be downstairs listening. He was a bass player, as I am. I'm sure, you know, that has something to do with my picking up bass, but I would listen to him playing salsa music and, you know, other forms of Latin music. And that was a big influence on me. My grandmother taught me Spanish at a very, you know, Spanish words at a very early age. So I was very much immersed in Puerto Rican culture when I was growing up in the Bronx.
It's sort of interesting that, you know, you say that, so that, I mean, you've been like, you have this whole other section from Cuba.
Yes. I've been to Puerto Rico as well.
Uh,
I've been to India also. So I didn't observe the issue of caste and colorism as much in Puerto Rico as I did in Cuba. And of course, it was very evident on my trip to India. Yeah.
A lot of what you photographed, those what you photographed in Cuba was a lot of the people were like some way in the arts. I mean, in some way, you know, it was, I guess that was extremely evident on the, what I know, you know, Cuban culture, you know, how
Very important.
I guess how supportive it is by,
Yes.
I know they have national, you know, international, one of the great ballet companies. I don't know if it goes, but Castro brought in and released a lot. So it was just interesting to see how.
Well, I was hoping someone would pick up on the parallel that, you know, the darker skinned people in the US and in Cuba filled similar roles, that you make it either by, you know, being a performer, an athlete, or you're doing menial labor jobs. It's very much the same. Well, 94%, yeah.
I'm really interested in the economy of things, especially around art and commerce, and then also when and exchange between people or, you know, I'm just curious, the Cuba project, like how do you kind of determine, like how do you make your subjects, like for other exchanges, like how do you think about that exchange and value of that?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. And I thought about it very differently my second trip than my first trip, because I really didn't understand how impoverished the people were until the first trip. And I didn't have the same, you know, create the same budget to give to the people the first trip that I did for the second trip. And it was partly because I understood even more for the second trip how I was in a privileged position relative to them, and that if I was going back and taking more photos, then I should put myself in a better position to help them for the, you know, in the exchange. Does that answer it, or do you want to ask me more?
I mean, as much or as little as you want to talk about it, but I guess, well, how do you, was this, did you get paid to do this project?
Oh, no. No, these were quote unquote vacations for me, you know what I mean? So, and I didn't go with a group. I went by myself, you know, I didn't have anyone with me. So these were, you know, these were adventures for me, like my kind of vacation where I get to experience a culture. I get to take photos that I wouldn't have the opportunity to take here in the US. And, you know, that's the beautiful thing for me. So I was very happy to find that people wanted an exchange and expected an exchange. But, you know, it also, it was really depressing that the people didn't want it, they needed it. And I could tell you so many times that, you know, I'm walking along the streets, and I did this all on foot. I was, you know, very rarely like I would get into like, I can't remember the term for it, but like someone riding a bike with a carriage on it. Yeah. So it was very rare that I would use one of them either. I was on foot, just walking the streets and finding interesting things. And this is just a small percentage of the totality of pictures that I took in Nevada. You know, but yes, the exchange was very important to me. And I can't, you know, so whatever the denomination of money there was, I was giving like 5s and 10s to people. If the more they were sort of impoverished, I would give more. And the more that, you know, sometimes the more that they demanded, I would give less even. You know what I mean? Because there's part of it as a game or a strategy. And what I was going to say was I would walk along, people would come up alongside me and want to show me different things, but I knew it was an expectation that I would pay them. And one person I ended up having to take to dinner with me. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of, you know, it was very interesting, but, you know, very depressing that the people are so bad off that that's what they needed to do to survive and take advantage of the tourism.
Just a little footnote to your question, then coming to your helping me to know something I haven't thought about in a long time. A lot of my photography work was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But in certain countries that we developed in Nepal and India, where clearly we were told, you know, not to have those exchanges, it might continue to perpetuate that paradigm that they were trying to avoid.
I see.
But I really respect and appreciate your ethos around that. So
Yeah.
we still struggle, I think, depending on who you are.
Right.
And now versus now.
Yeah. 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 Florence. Say it again. But I do think the culture of that in Cuba is very different than in India. It's not the same. But.
I would think it would be different depending on where you are. I keep thinking about places I've been and whether or not I felt, uncomfortable taking photos in certain places versus other places. And, yeah, or if someone was taking a photo of the tourists in the city, coming to the city and taking pictures, and just, I'm trying to visualize like that, yeah. Those moments, those exchanges, and yeah, and it would depend on the situation,
Mhm.
the circumstances, the location.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to the photo one of the photos, but it was a photo of a woman who was mentally ill and just laying on the ground in between like the sections of a storefront. But I approached her the same way and asked her if I could take her picture. And her question was, if I wanted to. That was her response, if you want to. But I gave her more money because of the condition that she was in. Yes. Let me see. For the seniors, I used a different camera than I used in Cuba. So for the senior photos, I used a Canon 1DX. And in Cuba, I was using a Canon 5D at the time. Yes.
Senior show, it seemed like in the curation of it that there were, it was curated, but there were family members who were kind of placed next to each other. You could just kind of talk about your general thought process around the curatorial aspect of that.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So the overarching, thank you. The overarching layout is oldest to youngest. So I started with the oldest and then, so it went from 90s till 80s to 70s all around to, there was a 56-year-old who snuck in. And that was because the very first event that I shot was the birthday party of the 94-year-old. And she was at the party and I assumed she was older. And then later found out that I later found out that she was only 56, but then I couldn't take her out because it's like, I couldn't say, well, I thought you were older. But within a few years, I tried to keep the family members together. And there were actually 3 sets of twins in the show. So I tried to keep them together. So I was very much aware of the family dynamics and who would want to be together, who would not want to be together, but have the overarching sequence be from oldest to youngest. That's also a good question. There were 2 people who made it very clear that they did not want their age to be shown. Both women, right? And then one pastor, I managed to get, I think, all of the African-American pastors in the show. One of them said to me, oh, you know what? I was at her church and from the pulpit. She said, yeah, that was a great great show that you did, Michael. I didn't expect my age to be on the card. I was like, well, you know, that's part of it. How are people going to know, like, who is what age? That's a part of it. Yes.
The two people that expressly say that they don't want their age to show, did you show their?
No, I did not.
So where did you place them? Because then people.
No, their cards were up. I just didn't have their age on the card. That's all. No, I wasn't going to go against them. That would have been death.
But in the show, when you were placing them.
Oh, I knew. No, I knew. I knew. Yes. No, I knew. Yes. So they were in the same cohort. Yes. Yes, with their peers. Yes. And one of them said, the people who know me know how old I am, and it doesn't have to be up there. You know what I mean? So I felt very comfortable placing them within their appropriate age group. Yes. Chris? Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't all get to see the photos before they went up, you know, and I took a series of photos of each one of them, and I had to decide which one I thought. I did. If they asked for it, I would show them at the time that I was shooting them, but I wouldn't say which one unless they said, this is the one that I want. That didn't happen that often. So for the most part, I had the ability to select which one was going into the show. And so there were only like one or two people with the show up who said, oh, I didn't really like my photo. You know, and it's that kind of thing, you know, it's not magic. It's more of like a mirror. You know what I mean? No. Yeah. Thanks, Ward. Thanks for coming. No one pulled out, no. But the one person who's, you know, came up to me and said that they didn't like their photo, she complains about everything. You know what I mean? She really does. And she has that reputation in the community of complaining. You know what I mean? So I wasn't going to feel but so bad about that one. What'd you say? Yeah. So. Most people, oh, yes, in the back. Oh, I'm sorry, Phil.
When this is thought, I may not be sure that even work and maybe awareness of colorism, and then it seemed to me in the discussion that the eldest look of photo is photographed a certain way, which to me was sort of it reminded me of kind of a street photo with a full flash photo in a way, also kind of white. And it doesn't work the same way as this work, for example, with contrast
Oh, I see.
and colors and things like that. I was wondering if that's something that
For the Cuba photos?
for the other.
Oh,
And it's really for the others. And
so did you feel like they worked better in black and white, or you think they would have worked better in color?
it's not better, it's more like it's thinking that the elders was brighter and
Oh, the oldest person.
all of them and as a group, as a series.
Yeah.
writer and also sort of he erased things a little bit in terms of
Okay. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. No, but I wasn't thinking at all about colorism with the photos of the elderly. Now, there was definitely a range of skin tones, which was a challenge in editing, especially with the people with darker skin tones. And I think that's more of a function of cameras, digital cameras, not necessarily capturing dark skin tones as well as, it's not set up for it really, so that was a challenge, but no, I wasn't thinking about colorism when I took the senior photos. So I just tried to present each one in the best way based on the lighting and background that I was presented with, because again, I wasn't shooting these uniformly in a studio. Yeah, so that didn't factor into it. Bill?
Yes, knowing that you're a musician, how did you find the music in Cuba and sort of photograph?
A lot of musicians.
How did you like that?
It was wonderful. It was almost like, it was amazing that you could go from one section of the city to another, and there would be a different band playing, and you couldn't hear the band that you just walked away from, but the whole city was live with music, and it was just beautiful. Yeah. Pamela?
Do digital cameras that you have compress the value more than the light value?
I wouldn't say so. I just think that maybe people who shot it with film could speak better to this, but I think camera developers develop based on a general population and don't consider the extremes of people that are going to be shot. That's what I'm, yeah. I did use flash, yeah. Yeah, and yeah. Well, they were mostly in daylight, but I did use fill flash, because there was a lot, depending on the day, there could be a lot of shade, or, you know what I mean? So I had to use the flash just to make sure I wasn't like, I hear you. Yeah. I hear you. Any other questions or what? Oh, thank you. Okay.